Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Abundant Wellness Podcast. Today, I have a dear friend of mine, Michelle Lautzenheiser, with me today, and we're going to be chatting about trauma recovery, how to be a good listener, different tools for recovery, things that helped, things that didn't help, and really like processing our own stories. And it's just going to be a really good conversation. So we can file this under the category of spiritual health, leadership, trauma recovery. In I know my podcast, I talk about a lot of different things, but this would kind of go in that category. So Michelle, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Anytime. Well, do you want to start off by sharing a little bit about who you are? I know you're in a busy season of motherhood right now, but I would love for the listeners to just kind of get a feel for a little bit about your life and where you're at right now in your season, and we'll kind of go from there.
I'm a wife to an engineer and a mom to two boys, and we're taking care of another boy. And so we're household of three boys. And I would say I would categorize myself as a creative and a spiritual person and someone who believes in wholeness, not just for myself, but for other people as well. And so, my hobby, my research, and things I'm into is really looking into that wholeness aspect.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes we kind of land in that passion for learning about wholeness out of necessity, right? Like it wasn't handed to me on a silver platter. So I had to go in search of wholeness. And I think our stories are similar in that way of it's kind of like that meme that's like me realizing I inherited generational trauma instead of generational wealth. And yes, it is like that. So we can't talk about wholeness without talking about the ways that we are not whole, right? The ways that prompted us to seek out wholeness. So whatever part of your story you feel comfortable sharing, and we'll just kind of dive into some questions there. What would you say kind of opened your eyes to the need for more wholeness and healing in your life?
Okay, so I've kind of always been somebody who I think something's broken in me, something's not quite right. And so I've always had this bend to find that missing piece, if you will. So I don't ever remember feeling that. It's always been part of maybe my experience. That's what I would say. It's always been a part of my experience. So, but as the years kind of went on, probably my mid-20s, I realized I really am not okay. There's some things that are really not okay. But I thought that spirituality was going to be the piece that just fixed everything. And by spirituality, I mean deep Christian faith. And if I just prayed and read my Bible and focused on Jesus, I was going to get well. And I did that for about a decade almost. And in 2020, I hit a point where I had a full nervous breakdown. Everything happening right in 2020.
What a great time. What a great time.
Yeah. But it hit my nervous system in a way that I was so dysregulated. I was constantly having panic attacks. I couldn't stop. My physical body couldn't handle it. And so I was having lots of panic attacks. I was having lots of weird body functions is the best way to explain it, which is just the nervous system being dysregulated. I would just feel always tingly and always, then suddenly my hands would go numb or and then I'm spiral thinking and I couldn't stop it. And that kind of was the I can't actually manage any of my symptoms anymore of trauma or of what was happening, the dysregulation. So in 2020, I just started looking for answers of why am I like this? What's happening? And I was seeing a doctor at the time, and they were like, "Oh, well, you just need to take these medications," and they weren't really helping. And then um, so that was the beginning. Yeah, I would say that was the beginning of really realizing like something's really wrong, and I actually need to dig further into this. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And no, I love that so if you see me looking down, it's because I'm like taking on what you're saying. That you talked about this because so many of us get stuck there where it's like we kind of pigeonhole ourselves for lack of knowledge, right? That our spirituality or our faith, specifically for us as Christians, I'm a strong believer in Jesus. I'm an inner healing and deliverance pastor. So it's very easy for me to like lean in to the spiritual aspect of things, right? But in doing that, we do inadvertently step into spiritual bypassing, which I know is kind of becoming more of a catchphrase right now, but I like that we're talking about it. I like that as a culture, we're starting to talk about it because it's been a really big problem for a really long time.
yeah,
And it makes you feel more broken over time instead of less broken, which is like, if we're supposed to judge something by the fruit, then it's like, obviously we're doing something because like clearly this would be fixed by now if it were a spiritual problem. So people often in trainings that, if I'm training on inner healing and deliverance, they'll ask me, well, if somebody just takes medication for their anxiety or their panic, is that like becoming an open door to the demonic? Is that like a crutch? Is that like we had a couple people ask questions in a similar vein at our most recent mental health class? And what I would say to that is that pills don't kill demons. Like it is literally that simple. If the problem goes away when you take a medication, there's a really good chance, and I'm not trying to be snarky, but like sometimes we get this like weird idea in our head and we lose some common sense, right? Which is if that were going to continue to be a problem, it would still be there, medication or therapy or not. You know what I mean? So, but I think this is where we're starting to kind of find some middle ground, I think, as the church, quote unquote, the Christian church, that we can't spiritually bypass these big, complex issues. And so when you started to recognize, like, oh, I have to stop ignoring my body. My body's telling me something is not okay. What steps did you start to take in that place once you realized, like, what I've been doing isn't really fixing it. So I need to be open to whatever other ways God might want to heal me or minister to me in this season. What did that look like for you?
yeah. It's so interesting because it's multifaceted for me, where it was like, so I'd been actually out of church for a while at that point because I was all the spirit hurt that I was feeling. And it's so funny because my husband was like, "I have to go back to church. We have to go back to church. Like it's 2020, things are bad. Let's go back to church."
Yeah.
Like, okay,
Yeah.
not that. But I think that helped because it got me back in community, and it got me back in community with people that actually had a wider scope than I did for what wholeness looked like. And so I would say like community became a really big piece. And it just, people would say things that I was like, we're like little tiny puzzle pieces, if that makes sense, where I'm like, oh, maybe I should look into that. And Amen Clinic actually came up for me. And I ended up with a brain scan. And what I loved about Amen Clinics was they were like, are you connected to a spiritual family? Are you dealing with your nutritional nutrients? Are you, yes, are you working out, moving your body? Are you like, it wasn't just like, here's only the spiritual part. You do this, like, you should be praying. But they were like, no, do the praying. Like, that's so important. But also, you have these other parts of your brain that need to be activated, and they're going to be activated through nutrition. They're going to be activated through now it's going to get activated by sleeping. I did go on a medication then, And all of that, it was like, suddenly I was open to this world of like, maybe it's not one thing will heal me. Maybe it's like me being open to a wider scope. And that was kind of the beginning, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, it absolutely does. And did you find, was there any internal resistance, like for yourself to, because I think we need to talk about that because I think that especially if we've overcome really big stuff in the past and we've been fine, right? Like where it's like, and by fine, I mean, like I'm doing good. Like I've gone to therapy before. I've figured out how to take care of my body and that worked in that season. And now you're in a new season for all the different reasons why our mental health can be stretched in a certain way, right? Or like tipped over in a certain way. For me, that feels like defeat. It feels like I did something wrong. This is my internal dialogue. I did something wrong. I like, how am I in this place again? You know? And so how do we, because there isn't at that point, there is internal resistance and it's not just from the external stigma. Like that's there. The external stigma is there, but then there's all this internal stuff that we have to remove. So what was that like for you and how did you push through that?
Um, so when you have this idea built up between old community, maybe how you grew up, that Jesus is the only answer for you, that your spiritual practices are the only answer for you, to suddenly be like, I'm in a doctor's office getting my brain scanned. There's that like, like, am I taking too far outside the church? Am I like, could Jesus actually be in this? And then like there was a lot of that sort of like pushback in my mind of like, well, if you're having to go outside of Jesus, you're not good enough. Like this isn't good enough. I would say that was that's a big one. It was like, yeah, it's like if you need this outside of Jesus, but then you're like, then you haven't yet doing it right, and so you're not good. You have to do it on your own. That was a lot of the resistance. I would say it's just that self-talk of like my whole values or what I could do or perform.
Yeah.
And I couldn't obviously perform, so I needed help. So that was like, yeah.
Absolutely. I remember that's a really, yeah. And this is why we're talking about the internal resistance, because it's a message that we received from somewhere, like wherever that internal dialogue's coming from, it's, it's a shame-based message that we've received from somewhere. And either it's, usually it's multifaceted, but either it's because we were not in an environment in our homes where it was okay to have our basic needs met, right? Which when I talked about this yesterday at the mental health class, which is God made you and he gave you flesh and bones and said that it was good. It doesn't say he gave you a spirit and said your spirit is the only thing that's good. It says that he put flesh and bones, breathed life into them and said what I created was good. And so when we understand the way that God made us, now, yes, life has sucked and hurt really bad, right? And it created all this dysfunction. And so it's not God who designed the dysfunction, it's God who designed our healing, but he wants us to partner with our body, right? And with our soul, with him and all of those things so that we can heal. And so I remember hearing at one point talking about like where we receive these internal messages, right? Of like, if I have to go outside of Jesus, which newsflash, Jesus is everywhere. So we don't now actually wanted to get that, like, because he's like in it all, like he's right. We don't have to be afraid, but but we are, because for whatever reason. So I remember, gosh, this was probably like 20 years ago, one of my youth pastors saying, oh, medication is just for people who don't know how to manage life, or like they have no coping skills or whatever. And I remember feeling a sense of like confusion, but also I wasn't on medication at that point, but I had been in high school. And so I remember thinking like, gosh, like if they found that out about me, would they look at me differently? You know what I mean? Like, would they see me as a strong leader, or would they just see me as this person who's breakable, you know? And, remember just feeling very like, oh, that doesn't feel like God's heart. That doesn't feel like the nature and character of God that I know him to be, which is kind and compassionate. And we get to encounter these aspects of God's character through practitioners that represent him well, like therapists. You know, there's a reason why God is called a wonderful counselor. You know, if you meet a good counselor, that's what it feels like. It feels like being in the presence of God. And I'm not saying that in a weird, like, woo-woo way, but there's a reason we need community. There's a reason we need each other. There's a reason God designed us for community in churches. And so that whole idea of I should just be able to go to Jesus to fix it all. I actually had a friend tell me that one time. You shouldn't need your friends. You just need to go to Jesus, as an excuse for really, really bad friend behavior. You know what I mean? And so then I felt this sense of shame of like, oh, I must be bad for needing community. Like crazy make, right?
Because we get these ideas in our head, and you know, whatever our life circumstance says, like this is the way, or our friends are, or whatever. But I think what's super interesting is that, like, when you really surrender to your idea of what your healing is gonna look like just letting it go and following what feels like the promptings of the Holy Spirit to where you're going. It's funny the things that he will use. In my story, at least, like everything I would say that like broke me as a child, like he's come up and like used those same things to heal. And you know, like that friendship, yeah, like that I like have now, like the friends I have now in my life, it's like they're like, no, like you need to go get EMDR. No, you need, and they validate like, oh, that came from somewhere. That feeling came from somewhere. And I'm like, how funny it is that like God comes, at least in my story, yeah, used exactly the same things that broke me to heal me. But I don't know if I would have entered into that if I thought that it had to look just a certain way, or, you know, I'm not in my prayer closet enough, so I'm not going to get healed enough, you know, like whatever our minds tell us. But that was my story. Like I was stuck in this, like, I just need to do. If I'm serving people more, if I'm praying more, if I'm reading the Bible more, then I will get my healing. And I remember even like at one point with my mother-in-law sitting down, and she's like, what is your greatest disappointment in this season? Like, you just seem really down. And I remember telling her, like, I just deserve my healing now. Yeah, like doing the thing deserve it. Like, she responded so graciously, but it was like I couldn't see past that. And I think what 2020 did for me was break me out of this mold of like, it only has to be this way. Yeah, it can be this way. And it was like, actually, I'm not a good mom right now. I'm not a good wife right now. Yeah. I can't hardly function. I'm not getting out of bed. I'm like, when I'm out of bed, I'm on my phone or like dissociating to try to function. And yeah, and it was like, it was time to wake up. I said, it helps. It helps so much to go to people that were like, both is okay. It's okay. God is in that. And you were talking about like, it was like sitting in the presence of the Holy Spirit. I felt the same thing when I sat down with Pat for the first time to do EMDR. Like I suddenly felt like, oh wait, God can even be here in therapy. Like God was, and I'll probably cry, sorry, but it was, I think for the first time, okay, this is actually that's how I'm going to frame it. You know, in the shack when, which I love the shack, but when Mac meets with Papa, yeah, like I feel like it broke his expectation. in that story, it's the expectation of who God was. Yes. I felt like that very experience happened where it was like, oh wait, Holy Spirit can be this soft landing place. It's now, it doesn't have to be this like, it can be this soft landing place where I actually can be vulnerable and I can actually be caring and I can actually be helped in my pain. And like that change, honestly, that was the beginning of changing my life. Wait, sit in a room with another human who was like, it's okay that you're where you're at, and I'm going to walk with you through it. 100%. Sorry.
No, don't apologize, because our stories matter. And I think that for me, especially, what was profound about I being in the same, like, very similar place as you was not having a mom who could do that for me, to then be sitting in the room with somebody that could reflect how a mom should be. Like, for me, that was profoundly healing for me to not only be able to tell my story and work through the broken pieces and the brokenness and the dysfunction and the pain, but to feel God's wraparound presence. I mean, there was never a session where God didn't show up somewhere in the trauma processing. Like, it's wild to me, but like, he did. And if you know anything about EMDR, you know that you have to not only like walk through the old stuff, but it's to process it and now come to a place where there's truth and resolution, right? And so I very much wanted God to be in that picture with me, in that process with me. And so you can find counselors and therapists that are like that, that are willing to sit with you in the messiest part of your story and give you hope and also validate that it's okay to be where you are. And I think this also kind of speaks to the fact that everybody has mental health, an aspect of their mental health that they're stewarding in every season, right? And so knowing that that is going to ebb and flow in every season means that I can assess, like, in every season, what tools maybe does God want to give me, or does he want me to partner with, so that I can continue to grow and heal and develop, whatever that looks like, right? So instead of it being, I used to think like, one day I'm going to graduate and I'm going to graduate and I'm going to get an A plus and I'm going to get like a certificate on the wall that says, Andrea has graduated. She'll never need therapy again, right? Which is like, honestly, that's still there. Like, I really would like a certificate for like A plus, checking off all the boxes, being awesome in therapy. Like, I do still want that. I'm not gonna lie. Yeah, maybe I should like print myself. That would be good. But that's not the goal anymore. Like, my goal is whatever performance-based mentality I had around that. Like, it made me a better person to graduate, right? Or it made me a more whole person to graduate. Now it's like, there's probably going to be stuff till the day that I die that God wants to continue to heal in me. And so how can we look at our mental health differently, deal with the stigma, the internal resistance, and just agree with God in every season, And so do you feel like having that approach, has that helped you at all in your process? Or do you feel like we'll kind of wrestle with that a little bit?
So, I mean, there'll probably always be a little bit of that performance space for me because that's one of the main things I struggle with in life.
Sure.
I love perfection. But I feel like what the Lord has actually done in my healing journey is release the expectation that there was any place I had to be at in the first place.
Yeah.
Fully loved. And being fully a daughter. Like that's the rival place. And when you're in that place, then suddenly you're like, oh, and I think having kids help see like, oh, like if they fall down, it's okay. We just pick them back. Right. It's not a big deal. And it takes the high stake of religious beliefs or like emotional beliefs we might have collected as children in our goodness. I feel like the journey the Lord has really actually brought me through is like releasing that and letting myself be surrendered to a place of just my job on earth really is to be loved.
Yeah. Right.
And and when you take that expectation out, that your healing journey has to look a certain way, or that you have to be performing a certain way.
Yep.
I think we all want to be loved and accepted, right? Like we want to be
Totally
known and fully held in all of our messiness. And I feel like when you can surrender to like letting people in on the process and vulnerability,
right.
It starts to change your brain. It does. It changes your mind, how it functions and how it operates to suddenly like, yeah, I'm always going to have always. There's like, I don't know. I do feel like that's part of life, right? Like there's pain in life. But one of the things that I found in this surrendered place is like Jesus actually wants to meet us in our deepest pain.
Mm-hmm.
He wants to be there. He wants to see it. He wants to hold us there. But sometimes we can't access that without medication, without nutrition, without because of how our bodies operate. So I think it really brought the shame a little for me through the journey that I to say, yes, Jesus is in my nutrition. He's in what I'm eating.
Right.
In my body because he's in my wholeness. And in order to get my wholeness, I have so I think that has profoundly changed my mind about a lot of things that we use modalities to heal. And so it's not about one particular thing working over another. It's actually being really having conversations like this where we are really like, have you tried this? Have you tried that? And it's like, let's find what is saying to you and what your journey is going to be. And then helping walk people through that. I think that's been one of the more profound things that this community that I'm in now, my church, but also in the healing, through a medical team and all. Yeah, like that has just really helped me. Like other people are walking me through this. They're being the hands and feet of Jesus, and to count what they can provide me is basically slapping down the gifts that she's giving.
Right.
So yeah, no,
it does.
Did I go on it?
Well, even if you did, it's a good tangent because I think that is where the healing happens, right, is in recognizing that you're loved right where you are and you have people that aren't going to leave, which goes back to our need for attachment and attunement, regardless of how old we are, right? We all need that. And so, and it's not people saying like, Michelle, you haven't graduated EMDR yet? Well, yeah, no. And I might never, like, I might always need that as a tool, you know what I mean? For different things come up. And so, in that regard, along that vein, because, our desire, I know you and I specifically talk about this a lot, is creating healthy, developing, growing, maturing cultures of safety within the church. So what are some ways, and so with that, like, I hope that in this conversation, as you guys have been listening, that you're hearing, like, we're not dissing the church. We're not dissing leadership. Like, we're in leadership. We are in the church. We are in the trenches trying to create change in some of these areas, recognizing where we ourselves are weak and where we need to shore up different things. But what are some things that, as you've developed this community or allowed kind of your shield to come down enough to be seen, that leaders have done that have actually helped bring restoration and healing? Because it's obvious the things that don't, right? Like those things we don't even have to like say, but what are some things that different leaders have done that have actually brought healing to you?
Yeah. So, I'm like, which ones do I talk about? I think one of the more, some of the profound ones that started me on knowing I could maybe be open and vulnerable is things like they would ask me how I was actually doing, like, how are you really doing? And then not just trying to be like, well, here's your Bible verse, or I'm gonna just pray that out of you, or like we're just gonna. It was like, oh, you know what? From what I know about you, it's really like what you went through, everything you went through, like what you're telling me about how you're feeling right now actually makes a lot of sense. And I think that was when people were like, it actually validating my feeling of like, it's understandable
Totally.
because of your journey. I think that was really profound for me. I think I think people actually like, I can tell that you're having a hard time. Do you just want to come over here into a more private situation and tell me about it? Like that so was incredibly helpful where it was like, oh, we're gonna cover you. I still want to hear you, but I want to like protect your dignity.
Yeah.
Make sure you're all safe. So actually removing me from group um uh, that I might not have felt as safe to be vulnerable in.
Right.
And then creating the space to like really, yeah, I think that was also extremely profound. And protecting my dignity was something that wasn't done a lot growing up and wasn't done a lot in my 20s in church.
Sure.
And so to like come into an environment where leaders were like, no, actually what you're going through is valid and it's valuable and we want to be there for you. So we're going to create spaces that are safe. And it was like pulling me aside into another room. I remember a leader was not able to meet with me right then, but she scheduled space.
Yeah.
And I met with her that day and I was a part of, she just showed up.
Yeah.
Amazingly. She wasn't trying to fix me.
Right.
She had no tools for me that day except for to like hear me. And everything she kept saying was, I just want you to know that you're like what you're feeling is valid. I want you to know like it makes sense that you're here. And I know that Jesus has more for you. You're gonna figure it out.
So good.
And it started a long-term conversation rather than a quick like rush.
Right.
And I think sometimes we as leaders, like we're like, how much capacity do I really have? Well,
Yeah.
it's in it, then you have capacity. Oh,
Right.
whatever it is. So just, I think discernment is also a big thing.
Absolutely.
Leaders, it's like Jesus gave us the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit is able to help us discern whether or not that situation is for us, right?
Right.
So as a leader, I can go in and be like, this one's not for me, but I know that God has more for them and I could be there in this moment for that with them.
Right.
So maybe I'm not going to block them on their longer. And then there's been people that the Lord's been like, this is your disciple. It's been, like I'm going to hold their hand through their healing journey. And I think letting people, I'm trying to think how I want to say that. I think that's been helpful where it wasn't just brush off every fight. Like people who were willing to hold my hand was really helpful. And they didn't need to fix me, and they didn't need it to be healed right away and fixed right away, but they were willing to just, okay, well, we're going to still keep believing. We're going to ask the Lord to open doors, and we're going to believe the next step is coming. So I think that was really good. Yeah. And not to over spiritualize. Okay, well, have you taken a nap? Have you like, let's go through the Maslows.
Did you drink coffee this morning? Because if so, yeah, really. No, that's so good.
Yeah.
Keep going. You're good.
To just over spiritualize it, but to be like, when we're like, well, I have to pray, it's like, yes, I have, but also I'm still feeling these things. And then it's like, well, maybe you need some water.
Yeah, right.
And so, yeah, today, like, I think so. Our bodies are just as spiritual as our spirit is. And so, yeah,
that's really good.
One thing, even if all of it, if one thing matters, then all of it has to matter, right?
Right. Exactly. Totally. And no, and I think, we do have a really good community up here. I feel like of leaders that are very, not all of them, but a lot of them, that we're maturing in that area to where, we're learning to be safe for ourselves so that we can be safe for other people. And so there's a little bit of an overflow that's happening where it's starting to become a lot more okay to just say like, yeah, like stress resilient, not super great right now. Like there's things I'm working through that are really hard. And knowing that we're going to be cared for by our community, which is so healing in and of itself. So what would you say, like what kind of last parting words would you say, to somebody who's maybe where you were in 2020? What words of encouragement would you like to give to them today?
I think I would say first off, like, I'm so sorry that any community that you've been in um, made you feel less than or devalued because you were struggling. And I would also say that if you're praying and you're reading your Bible and you're quote unquote checking off the list of things that you're supposed to be doing, like, and it doesn't feel like enough, that's okay. And you can seek more help. There is more help for you. And that doesn't lessen your spirituality to need.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I would say that. Yeah. And I would just want to like say, like, you don't have to be ashamed to need help. We like literally every human being needs help on the planet. Every human being. And the fact that you need help doesn't make you less value anything in your life. Like you're equally loved and you're equally accepted, equally okay to just be a son or a daughter and fully loved and known.
Absolutely. And the only other thing I would add to that, because that's really, really good, is that just because I'm like trying to be careful with my words because it's not just, but like if you've had the experience of being really harmed in a church setting, like church community setting that really was not emotionally healthy or safe, there are good communities out there that God does want to restore you through. But if you're not at the place where it feels safe enough to go to church, I would still strongly encourage finding a good therapist to start working through some of that trauma, because we have to first recognize what's not safe in order to build safety. Like, right? So if we don't know what the red flags are, then we're not going to know what to look for. And so it's okay. It's okay if that feels scary, if it feels difficult. Thankfully, I do feel like, our church leadership, we've done a really good job of learning how to be safe with each other and have crucial conversations and work through big things. Not that we're perfect at it, but creating those elements to where it's like we can say the word, we can say we're triggered and nobody's going to be like, deliverance, like, oh yeah, I was triggered today too, and like we talk about it and we work through it and we recognize that we are whole beings, meaning 100% body, 100% soul, 100% spirit, 100% of the time. And so, which is hard for us to wrap our brains around. So, gosh, this was such a good conversation. And I am going to drop some resources in the show notes, different books that I know you love, but I love as well. Just be prepared that Strong Like Water will make you cry, but in a good, it will make you cry, but in a way that you're like, oh, that was like a warm hug that I didn't know my soul needed, that kind of language or this. And so I will drop some resources in the show notes, but Michelle, I just want to say thank you. I'm so proud of you. I'm honored to be your friend. It's been a joy to just get to watch you just be you, like learn to be more you and not be afraid to dive into those places that are difficult. And, it's been a joy. And I know that what you've shared today is going to be an encouragement to others as well. So thank you for sharing your time with us today.